Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
So you get a call from a dentist who practices down the street from your office, or maybe from this dentist's practice broker. This doctor's been in business for 35 years, and they have a now smaller office that they've been phasing out of for quite some time. Maybe they're working 2 or 3 days a week. They decided to get out a year or so ago and tried selling and found no buyers. So now they're looking to at least salvage something and sell their charts. They know you, and due to the close proximity of your office, you're their first phone call. At first blush, this seems like a pretty good idea. The practice is not all that far from yours, so there's a good chance that the patients won't have too much difficulty with the transition. And this added patient flow could give your practice an immediate productivity boost. The price also doesn't seem all that bad. Or does it? I mean, how would you tell? You really have nothing to compare it against. This scenario I've just described has become more prevalent, especially over the last 5+ years. And it makes sense. As I've discussed in prior episodes, over 1/3, 37% to be exact, of the practicing dentists in the United States are over 55 years of age, with 16% of dentists in the U.S. over 65. Many of these folks are looking to retire or at least cut back, and not everyone has a practice that someone or some corporation would want to buy. In these cases, they may just shut their doors and at least possibly sell their charts. And this trend will most likely, just on demographics alone, accelerate over the next 5+ years as more and more doctors approach retirement age, which on the flip side is why now is a better time than ever to acquire additional locations. That's a whole other subject we've talked about before. So maybe you, like many of MGE's clients, have had an opportunity to buy a retiring doctor's charts. Maybe you know somebody who has. And yes, in some cases, it's a great idea and a potential big boost to your business. In others, it has all the makings of an expensive disaster. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. We'll discuss the pros and cons of buying a doctor's charts, or retiring doctor's charts rather, how to structure the deal, and what is a good or not so good price. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host, and I think the best place to start is by putting this type of transaction into the proper perspective. Because you're not really buying a practice. We have algorithms to price a practice. That's easy, a full office, right? In any office purchase, you have a couple of things that are priced in. The equipment, no compete clause, and goodwill, the name of the practice, the reputation, and the idea that people are used to coming there. You have the charts and whatnot. And there's usually some degree of agreement on the transition. When you're buying charts, you're not really buying the same thing. And I say this because I've seen some ridiculous prices associated with buying charts. They're almost priced like you would price a dental practice, which, the pricing algorithm for dental practices has been around for quite some time. It's become a bit warped over the last 5 or 10 years, specifically in some areas. I remember in Southern California, especially in the mid-2000s, it went a bit high. In Canada, it's a lot higher than in the United States. But the safe number when you're purchasing an office is usually about 70% of last year's collections. And that's purchasing the entire practice. Okay, that's everything. Whether the person staying on as an associate, the doctor you're buying from, is immaterial. It's 70% is the usual number, and that number gets toggled or adjusted based on how old the equipment is, and things of that nature. Do they have a cone beam and so on that they just bought? So we have those pricing algorithms, all right. But there really is no algorithm for buying charts. And the funny thing is so if you're buying a practice, the patients are used to coming to that specific location. If you're buying charts, even if you're just down the street, this isn't something that's been trained in or where patients are used to coming to your office. And for that matter, if you buy charts, there's no obligation for those patients to come to your practice at all. You're essentially just buying patient records and sort of the inside skinny or position to market to these folks, and hopefully some endorsement to come to your practice from the retiring doctor, which is not always possible. All right. So for that matter, if you think about it, you could buy, You have some doctors selling 500 charts. You buy the 500 charts. The patients have zero obligation to come to you. Another doctor could market to those same patients when the doctor you're buying from them retires. I have too many doctors in this example. I apologize. And go to that other practice. You're buying the charts from Dr. A, and Dr. C down the street ups their marketing as Dr. A is retiring and attracts all those patients despite the fact that you've already bought the charts. There's zero guarantees. And while they're patients of record for this doctor, the retiring doctor, for you, they're essentially all new patients. So what I'm saying, I guess, is let's think of this transaction in the correct light. This is a marketing transaction. It is new patient acquisition. So if you're looking at any type of a new patient acquisition avenue to determine whether it's a good or a bad idea, you have to take a look at how much are you spending for each new patient. So it's a good idea to have for yourself how much you are spending if you're looking at a transaction like this for each new patient. We call this your acquisition cost. What does it cost you to get a new patient? And you may or may not know this, and there may be different acquisition costs for different types of marketing that you are doing. And, sometimes that's okay. For example, you might be spending more for an implant funnel patient, but the price per case there is bigger, right? So it ends up working itself out from a return on investment perspective versus a patient that you just advertise to with a postcard to come in for a cleaning and exam, right? That maybe doesn't have as many problems. But, you have to know your acquisition cost. Not knowing your acquisition cost from a business perspective is like marketing blind. You may as well just, market however you want to market then and have no idea what you're doing. You have to know your acquisition cost. So how do you determine it? It's very easy. Let's say I'm spending $2,000 a month on pay-per-click on Google, and I get an average of 10 new patients per month, right? From these pay-per-click ads. So I'm spending $200 a new patient. Or I'm spending $5,000 a month on postcards, and I get 15 new patients on average per month for these postcards. Well, there I'm spending about $294 per new patient. Okay, that's my basic acquisition cost. Now, you can get that acquisition cost down. I'm not going to go off on this too hard, but let's say, for example, your receptionist is not great at converting these phone calls. People call in and they don't get scheduled. If you improve their conversion capability, well, then yeah, you can actually, I'm spending, let's say again, back to our PPC example, pay-per-click, I'm spending $2,000 a month on pay-per-click and getting 10 new patients. But then I look and I see I'm actually getting 30 phone calls. So then my receptionist is only converting 33% of the new patients. If I could get them to convert 66% or 20 phone calls, and I'm still spending that, $2,000 a month, my acquisition cost goes down to $100 per new patient. So there's little things you can do to toggle this, but without even doing any of that, because you're looking at your current scene and whether you should buy this doctor's charts, I would just want to know my acquisition cost and have a decent average of what this looks like. Okay? Because the truth is if what this doctor wants for their charts is too much, I could just spend more money on the marketing and get more new patients. You see? So let's say this doctor wants $500 a chart and I'm spending $250 for a new patient. Well, why would I spend $500 a chart? I may as well just spend $250 and get more new patients. I mean, chances are if he or she retires, I'm probably going to get some of those folks anyway. So I'm not going to overpay for this. But let's take how we would apply this. So let's say you have a doctor down the street. They want to sell you 500 charts, and your average acquisition cost is $250 for just, an average run-of-the-mill patients. Okay. And so it's 500 charts, average acquisition cost of $250. You could say if all 500 of those patients showed up, that purchase would be worth $125,000, right? 500 times 250 per new patient. I would say no, and I'll tell you why. Because there's no guarantee of seeing all 500 people. Theoretically, you could see zero, or you could see at least a few, right? So the ideal scene, if you're buying these charts, would to be able to structure the transaction so that you're doing it on a contingency. I've seen this done before. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes the seller is not interested. But let's say someone approaches you, they want to sell you 500 charts. You could go, okay, how about I pay you per new patient that actually comes into my practice? Now, obviously, that'd be a bit of an honor system, and you'd want to be ethical and stand up on your end and pay this doctor if they're doing it. But if you were paying, let's say, $250 per chart, every patient that shows up, $250, and you do it for a period of time. Right? A year, 2 years, however long you think is fair. You work that out with the doc, right? The problem with that, even though that would be the ideal to structure it, is not a lot of selling doctors will go for that because they just want to be done, right? And there's also, they don't know you, you don't know them. How do they know you're going to report that this patient came from their practice? Or maybe this patient also got your postcard. So who really brought that patient in? It could potentially be messy. I say that because that was the ideal way of doing it. I don't always see it working out that way. I have seen it work out that way. Usually what you're going to see is somebody wants a bulk amount for the access to all of these charts. So if that's the case, you're going to have to do some work, right? There's some things you're going to have to look at. There's a few different steps here. So let's take a look at what these are. So let's say, again, it's 500 charts that are, let's say, active within the last year, 2 years, or whatever. So the first thing you're going to want to do is some due diligence and research. You're going to want some time built into this transaction. If it's being done through a broker, you might have a letter of intent you guys sign where you're going to spend 3 to 4 weeks researching this and whatnot, right? And I would definitely leverage one of your team members to help you with this. Your office manager, maybe your office manager and your treatment coordinator, people who are somewhat with it with relation to being able to go through a chart and see what's there. So the first thing I would want to do is determine, have they really seen these people over the last 1 to 2 years? Are these patients actually real? Okay. Then I'm going to want to get an idea of what kind of work is there in these charts. Let's say the doctor had a lower volume practice, new patient acquisition wasn't a priority, and they weren't getting a ton. So you look at the work that's actually diagnosed in these charts that's incomplete, and there's very, very little. Well, that might not be an attractive purchase for you at that point, okay? But let's say you've reviewed the 500 charts. They're real. They have actually been in the practice, okay? There is a considerable amount of work to do in these charts. The next thing I would look at, and this is why I say leverage your team, especially since if you don't want to be over there by yourself flipping through charts or going through a computer, is you want to take a look at how many of these patients are involved in plans that you may not accept, okay, or don't plan to. And I would never recommend that you join a plan, okay? So let's say, out of the 500 charts, 350 are in some PPO plan that you don't accept and you have no intention of accepting it. Well, that ratchets the price down a bit because, you're going to have a harder time. It's not impossible, but you're going to have a harder time bringing those folks in if you don't accept their plan, especially if they're transitioning from a retiring doc who does accept their plan. And the doc says, hey, go see Dr. Smith down the road. I'm retiring. First thing they'll probably look at is he in my network? And no, he's not. So then, okay, I'm going to go see Dr. Jones across the way here who does accept my insurance, right? So I would definitely take a look at I would look at the plan involvement in these charts. And then the last point I would look at, and this would be a discussion point with the selling doctor, is do they intend to help you with this transition? And by that, I mean letters, emails, etc., an endorsement, the fact that they're transferring their charts to your practice. And as far as the legal aspects of that, whether they are or not allowed to do that, how they're allowed to do that, that's something, it's a question for your practice broker or your Dental Practice Act. But if they could send out some type of communication, hey, it's been great serving you for the last 35 years. I'm finally retiring and I'm transferring all of my patients over to Dr. Smith down the road. I've known Dr. Smith for 15 years when he or she started practicing and they're great, blah, blah, blah. I highly recommend you go see him or her. That helps, whether it's emails, phone calls, etc. You might even have a situation where there's enough volume where maybe some of the team comes with the charts. You might have a hygienist who doesn't plan on retiring that works for the selling doctor who might transfer with these charts, which might help from, they see a familiar face, right? So there's no one size fits all here, but these are different things to consider. So let's say you've evaluated the 500 charts. They've all been in the practice, let's say within the last year. You've verified it and you've had your staff help you do this. There's zero plan or insurance issues. That's fine. There's a good amount of work to do in these charts. This doctor is willing to give you a ringing endorsement. You might even have 1 or 2 of the staff coming from this practice to move over to yours. You've checked all the boxes, right? But even so, out of those 500 charts, there's still no guarantee that they're going to come to your practice. Okay. So how much would you offer for something like this? And I'm just basing this off of transaction I've seen our clients do. Maybe you offer $30,000 or $40,000. You might go, wow, that's not a lot of money. You're essentially offering less than $100 a chart. But again, let's do the math on this. Let's say you offer $40,000. And remember, we figured out our acquisition fee, right? Which isn't difficult, as I pointed up. Let's say our acquisition fee for a new patient is $250. So you're going to offer this doctor for their 500 charts because they want them just bought. They don't want to pay contingencies or whatever. You're going to offer them $40K. Your acquisition fee is $250. To make this transaction work, you would have to see at least 160 of these 500 patients' charts that you're buying, because 160 times $250 is $40,000, which is what you're paying for the charts. If you're not confident that you'll see 160 of these 500 patients, then it's a bad deal, because you could just not do it at all and instead market. And part of what happens is that this gets camouflaged a bit, because I've seen these purchases occur where somebody pays and then there's that initial bolus of patients who come into the practice from the retiring doctor's office. So you see an increase in production the first 1 or 2 months. And then it sort of trails off, right? Because maybe the follow-up wasn't good or whatever. And so initially you think, wow, this was great. I'm producing an extra $20,000, $30,000 a month. And then you look at it and you go, wait a minute, I paid $90,000 for these charts. I haven't even made my money back yet. And of course, you may make it back over time if these patients stick with the practice, but it wasn't a good deal, right? I've seen a lot worse too, where someone's really overpaid for these. But that's sort of how I would structure it. I would look at, what would be fair. I think I'll see at least 150 of these patients. Well, then I'll offer them $30-something thousand because that's fair. That's what I would pay for 150 new patients, because my acquisition cost is $250, right? Because you could just not buy the charts and do that anyway. And then if there were any issues with any of these points, whether it's plans, I would move those charts out of the transaction, especially if it's a plan you don't take. What if there's no way for the doctor to do the transition or the endorsement? They've moved out of the country, or maybe they've passed away. These would be things that would lower my price for these charts, okay? Or, I can't really verify that they've seen them. It seems a little sketchy. This would lower my price. Then we're into the $15,000, $20,000 range, right? So that would be more or less, if I had to structure a deal like this, and this is what I've recommended to clients, how I would structure it. I'd base it off, what's my acquisition cost? What does this person want? Are they willing to do a contingency? Because that would be best where I'm paying by the patient. You have some system to make sure there's some oversight. Are they willing to check all the boxes and do an endorsement? Are there no plan issues? Have they actually seen these patients, and so on? These are the things that I'm looking at, and that's sort of how I price it. How many patients are you confident you're actually going to see out of these group? And there's a last couple things here you're going to want to consider if you're looking at a transaction like this. The first one I kind of talked about, I forget how long ago this was. It was a few months back. I did an episode on the law of diminishing returns. I think it did it at the end of last year. I could be wrong. And the basic concept of law of diminishing returns is, where someone thinks, well, if I just double my new patients, let's say a person's making $50,000 a month from new patients in revenue, and if I just double them, I'll make $100,000 a month. Well, there's other things that you have to double as well in order to make that extra $50,000 a month, right? To do that 100, because there's other things involved. You have to have time to see these new patients. You have to have hygiene slots available if they come through hygiene. You have to have doctor time available to actually diagnose. You have to have doctor time available to actually present. And if you don't up those things and you just up one thing, the new patients, you may not see the return that you're looking for. So you'll go from, I don't know, let's say 30 new patients, that's making you 50 a month, and you go to 60, and now you're only really making 70 because you didn't increase the amount of doctor time, hygiene time, etc., commensurately with this increase in new patients. So if you're going to be buying charts and you're potentially setting yourself up for this humongous inflow of patients, you don't want to waste this opportunity, right? And this is why with marketing, you can ratchet your marketing up over time, in line with your practice as your practice is growing, so that you don't blow the doors off and you end up with a situation where you're wasting opportunities. I would want to make sure that if I'm doubling my patient flow after month 1, I can actually handle that flow. Now, I'm not saying to not do it. I would see if I can arrange things so I can handle the flow. But then there's a number of things to consider. Let's say you've doubled the number of phone calls. Well, then gosh, you're going to have somebody else possibly at the front. What if you are going to end up with a situation where your hygiene's already packed and you have nowhere to put people? Well, you're going to need another hygienist, right? And then if you're going to get another hygienist, there's a few other things to consider. Let's say you're a solo doc and you already have 2 hygienists. So you're already running around doing exams and whatnot while trying to make your production. Well, now you're going to have 3 hygienists. Can you actually keep up with that? Probably not. It's going to actually lower your productivity because now you have no time to sell, present, and properly spend enough time with a patient to actually end up doing treatment. So you're going to want to make sure that you can actually handle this influx if you're going to end up with this influx if you buy these charts, right? And the last thing I'd consider if I were looking at a transaction like this is, should you buy the charts or should you just make this a satellite location for your practice? Now, there's a lot of things to consider there. I actually did a couple episodes early on in the podcast on, the do's and don'ts of adding a second location. I should know the episode number. I didn't think of it before I started recording, and I apologize. But if you scroll through, you'll find it. I think it was 1 or 2 episodes. But if you're going to add a second location, one of the first most important things, obviously, beyond the fact that you can already handle location 1, is how close this second location is to your practice. I've seen people buy a second location down the street or within easy walking or driving distance. And this is all relative. You have to keep in mind because it really depends on where you practice. If you practice in Manhattan and you have a practice on the Lower East Side and you're looking at buying a practice on the Upper West Side, that's a completely different universe. You're not going to be pulling patients from one practice to the other, right? But as far as actual number of miles, it's next to nothing. Whereas if you were to do that out in a rural area in Indiana or Ohio, 2 or 3 miles is not that big of a deal. That, someone's used to driving 15 miles to go see the dentist. So in that case, I wouldn't do it because it's too close to my office. And I've seen this mentality that, well, it's great. I have this office and I have that office and I can share patients between them. Don't ever do that. That is a terrible idea for a number of reasons. Number one, each practice should survive intact on its own. Number two, I want you to imagine for a second that one day you go to sell one of those locations. How are you going to enforce a no-compete? Or how are they going to enforce a no-compete on you? And would you buy that practice? Let's say you have a doctor and they're sharing practices, or patients rather, between 2 practices, and they want to sell you one of the practices. Would you buy that? I wouldn't buy it because there's a good chance the patients will just migrate to the practice the doctor stayed in because that's the person they know. They don't know me. So you could potentially, if someone's offering up their charts, look at buying the office, and you would want to make sure it checks a few boxes. I did do an episode on it. Or if you want us to look at it, you can always call us here at MGE at 800-640-1140 or request a free consultation online. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. We'll help you look at something like this. But let's say it's across town and patients would go to one office or the other based on where they live. That might be a good deal. And if the doctor is looking at retiring, it's a smaller office. You're probably going to get a really good deal on it. It's got halfway decent equipment. Maybe it needs a paint job, some new carpet or whatever. You stick an associate in there and the overhead's probably low because, it's the revenues are so low that they can't sell the practice. Might not be a bad deal. You get it for a song and you scale it. Now you have a second location that's actually doing pretty well. But again, I warn you, don't do this if it's down the street or next door, and don't ever get into the idea of sharing patients, it's just a bad idea. It's a very bad idea. The only time I'd probably say that could work is, let's say you've got 5 offices in some county and they're far enough apart from each other that patients wouldn't regularly migrate from one practice to the other, but maybe you only have a cone beam in one of the practices, right? So implant patients all go to the main office or something like this. That could work, but I wouldn't have it where, I'm getting my cleaning at office 1 this year and, 6 months later I'm going to office 2 because, I can just bounce between the two. That's just a bad business model. Please, please, please don't do this. And I know I'm saying this a lot, but I remember seeing a client do this, and I found out after they'd done it, and they're spending $700,000 in the new office and doing all the build out or whatever, and I just didn't know what to say. I would never have told them to do that. It was a bad idea, and I felt really bad. Anyway, so this can work, buying a retiring doctor's charts, or not work. As I was mentioning, it all depends on some of the things that we discussed here. If you can make it work, I think that's great. It can be a big boost to your practice. The only thing I would say is don't get FOMO about it, fear of missing out, and buy something. It sometimes takes severe discipline, right? So there's 500 charts and they want $100,000 for them and they're going to sell them to the other guy down the street if you don't buy them. Don't get FOMO and overpay. If it's so far removed from what your actual acquisition cost is for new patients, I would just recommend that you don't do it. It's just going to create an expensive disaster. If the other doctor who wants to buy them does that's their call. It's not yours. And protect yourself in this regard. But it can be a good deal if the numbers work. Anyway, kind of a little bit of an obscure subject, but I thought it was worth talking about. I hope it helps. If you'd like to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. And I'll put that link for the free consultation. If you want to check this out, or you have maybe you're running into one of these opportunities and you want some help, we're more than happy to help. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.